Welcome to the Country Watch Political Intelligence Briefing Quick Hits, a weekly briefing of hot stories across the world in brief. I'm Denise Youngblood-Coleman, and I'm the Editor-in-Chief and Senior International Affairs Analyst at Country Watch. This week, I'm covering two stories out of Israel. First, in the aftermath of the March elections that yielded an inconclusive result, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's attempt to form a government failed and his mandate expired. Netanyahu's ability to form a coalition had rested on inclusion of both the extreme right-wing religious Zionist Party and the Islamist United Arab List in his government. But religious Zionists Party made clear it would not be in government with the United Arab List, essentially killing Netanyahu's hopes for holding a majority in parliament. Prime Minister Netanyahu thusly informed President Reuven Rivlin that he had been unable to secure a majority in the 120-seat Knesset and returned the mandate to form a new government back to President Rivlin. President Rivlin then handed the mandate to form a government to Yair Lapid, whose party Yesh Atid had received the second most votes in parliament after Netanyahu's Likud. It was to be seen if anti-Netanyahu forces could consolidate power to form a government of national unity. Lapid would have 4 weeks to try to coalesce the anyone but Netanyahu bloc from the far right through the center and to the left. From the left, there were Meretz, Labour, and United Arab List. From the center, there was Yesh Atid in blue and white. And from the right, there was Yamina as well as Yisrael Beitenu. Of particular interest would be the question of if Lapid could form some sort of agreement with Naftali Bennett, the former defense minister and religious right-wing leader of Yamina. Bennett was once a Netanyahu ally who eventually became a foe and a rival. Progress was being made in these coalition talks between Lapid and Bennett regarding a future government that would include Yesh Atid and Yamina, but also extended to discussions with Mansour Abbas, the head of the United Arab List Ra'am party. Other parties involved in the discussions and expected to be part of a national unity government were Labour, Meretz, Yisrael Beitenu, and Benny Gantz's Blue and White. In order to help secure Yamina's participation in the government, Lapid reportedly offered Bennett a rotating prime ministership position, with Bennett set to go first as head of government. There were high hopes that a new government in Israel might be in place by May 13th. But violence was flaring between Palestinians and Israelis in Jerusalem and Gaza. In fact, the situation in Gaza had escalated so ominously that the Lapid-Bennett government formation process was being impacted. That brings me to the other huge story out of Israel. At the heart of the clashes in East Jerusalem between Israeli police and Palestinians was an eviction case involving Palestinian families living in the East Jerusalem Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. The families had lived there since 1956 as a result of a United Nations brokered arrangement intended to house families who lost property when Israel became a nation state. But the Israeli nationalist organization Nahalat Shimon was arguing that the owners of the land prior to 1948 were Jewish, and so the property should revert to Israeli Jews. They were using a 1970 law passed after Israel gained control over East Jerusalem to press their case in court. Israel's Supreme Court was scheduled to hear the Sheikh Jarrah case on May 10th, but it was postponed. With the violent clashes between Palestinians and Israeli forces escalating in East Jerusalem, Palestinian militants in Gaza were firing more than 150 rockets into Israel, many of which were intercepted by missile defense systems. Hamas and Islamic Jihad claimed responsibility for the rocket attacks. In response, Israel carried out airstrikes on Gaza, yielding many casualties, including children. The United Nations has demanded an end to the violence, warning of a full-scale war. Meanwhile, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced that an envoy would be dispatched to the Middle East to try to calm the tensions. Blinken also implored Israel to avoid civilian deaths. But the Secretary of State also made note of Israel's right to defend itself, distinguishing the actions of a sovereign state to do so and the actions of Hamas, a terrorist organization. Across the world in Colombia, violent protests left dozens of people dead and hundreds more injured. The protests first started in response to the fiscal reform introduced by President Iván Duque as a tax hike intended to maintain social programs, including support for those struggling with the effects of the pandemic. The counter-argument was that the proposed value-added tax on basic goods would disproportionately hurt working people who are already hard hit by the pandemic. Given the mass demonstrations in the streets, President Duque withdrew the reform package, but the move was too late. Angered by hardline treatment of protesters, the demonstrations had intensified, with accusations of police brutality now dominating the political landscape. Moving on to the Maldives, the Speaker of the Parliament of the Maldives, former President Mohamed Nasheed, was badly injured in a blast caused by an explosives device planted close to his house. Speaker Nasheed was initially placed on life support, but his condition has since improved. Nasheed gained notoriety as the first democratically elected president of Maldives in 2008. He served until 2012, when he was forced to resign amidst spurious conditions, including opposition-led protests. He went into exile for some time, ultimately returning home and remaining a leading political figure in the Maldives, including his newest role as parliamentary speaker since 2019. In the days after the blast, police in Maldives announced that they had arrested an alleged prime suspect in what was now being viewed as an attempted assassination of the former president. There was a search on for other conspirators. The Maldives police added that the attack appeared to have been carried out by religious extremists. Finally, the terror group Al-Qaeda, which was responsible for the September 11, 2001 terror attacks on the United States, promised war on all fronts as United States President Biden withdrew US troops from Afghanistan. The timing of this warning occurred around the time of the 10th anniversary of the killing of Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of those terror attacks by United States Special Operations Forces in Pakistan. Also of likely significance was the decision by President Joe Biden to withdraw United States troops from Afghanistan. It was possible that the terror network, which was largely being eclipsed in recent times by ISIS, also known as Daesh, was looking for relevancy once again. The clarion call for a comeback from Al-Qaeda should be regarded seriously. This is particularly true if the Taliban shows itself to be a covert enabler of Al-Qaeda in violation of the prevailing peace deal. But regardless of whether or not Al-Qaeda proves itself to be a resurgent terrorist force, the fact remains that the threat from Islamist jihadism was now multi-sided and internationalized, no longer centered in Afghanistan. No longer based in Kandahar in Afghanistan, Africa's Sahel region presents a far more active Al-Qaeda Islamic State arena than Afghanistan. As well, Boko Haram operates from Nigeria, and Somalia-based Al-Shabaab could conceivably be viewed as a bigger threat right now than Al-Qaeda. Meanwhile, with the ongoing war in Yemen, its more forgotten mountainous regions offer far more neglected terrain for extremists to gather. Thus, to retain forces in a country that is no longer the epicenter of Islamist jihadist terrorism is not in keeping with smart, agile defense in a world where threats are now widely dispersed. For more information about these and other stories, read my weekly political intelligence briefing and my coronavirus report, both of which are accessible from the front page of the CountryWatch website at www.countrywatch.com. Thank you for your time. Have a great day. And remember that now more than ever, as we function in the international marketplace, as we confront climate change, and yes, as we try to survive this lethal global coronavirus pandemic, yes, please remember that we live in an interconnected world.